Did Team Bintuwak take a more ethnographic style of storytelling? Let's find out. Please welcome members Ronald Maliao, Beverly Jaspe, Richard and Ritchel Cahilig.
Environmental greetings. Climate emergencies affect people's adaptation to their environment. For many Nabaoinons whose source of food is mainly from the river, the changing climate makes their life more difficult. As a frontline community, they are vulnerable. We in Team Bintuwak, composed of Ronald Maliao, Beverly Jaspe, Richard Cahilig, and yours truly, conducted a data gathering activity last September 25 to 26 in the form of interviews, focus group discussions, community dialogues, immersion hikes, and cultural contests with the men, women, and youth of Nabaoy.
What's up, guys? I'm Ronald, project leader of our OML engagement. I am responsible on the research and science side. We conducted interviews to 126 households in our site in the Nabaoy River in the province of Aklan. 31% of the residents are full-time fishers, but everyone have riverine fishing as an alternative or supplemental livelihood. However, 77% of the 38 full fishers, or 23% of the population, are full-time fishers with no alternative livelihood or supplemental income. The majority are aware of climate change, with extreme heat and rain as the most cited manifestation. At least more than half have knowledge of what causes climate change, and Nabaoinon believes it is largely caused by human activities as well as deforestation. More than half of our respondents acquire their climate change knowledge from personal experience, which has major implications on our drive for climate change literacy to the grassroots. The happiness index in 10-point scale is also in decline since 1990s. Coincidentally, our findings also show decline in fish catch since 1960s. The trajectory of decline is similar in all species groups. Fishers in Nabaoy River in Aklan use traditional fishing methods and gears, and their fishing and ecological knowledge are transmitted across generations, largely from their elders and community. Watch out for our upcoming publications in Journal for Nature Conservation titled Climate Change, Indigenous Knowledge Systems and Practices, and Riverine Fisheries, the Case of Malay Aklan, Philippines.
Out from the data and materials we gathered, we launched a media blitz campaign entitled Kinaiya It Kailayahan, the role of indigenous knowledge, systems, and practices of Nabaoinons in Malay Aklan in developing local climate change resiliency. Starting October 11, we organized a series of multi-sectoral climate fora called Historia It Panyempo sa Ilaya. Last October 31, we held the Bugao Kinaiya, a cultural show of Nabaoinons which featured local performing arts and artworks and display of fishing tools, indigenous handicrafts, souvenirs, and other IKSP exhibits in Nara Resort, Nabaoy Malay Aklan, with the presence of multi-sectoral stakeholders. Last November 8, we held the open forum, coffee table book launching, conservation conversation with climate advocate, and Daganas film showing in Nara Resort.
Hello everyone, I'm Richard, field researcher and in charge of producing Daganas. Daganas is an Akyanon word, means sound of rushing water. It is a series of documentary videos of Nabaoinon's IKSP anchored on the baseline study highlighting the local languages and belief systems and traditional socio-ecological systems which targeted to mainstream the effects of climate change under adaptation.
Kinaiya It Kailayahan Coffee Table Book aims to showcase Nabaoinon's indigenous knowledge systems and practices and to synthesize various activities conducted by the Team Bintuwak.
Kinaiya It Kailayahan campaign patuloy na isinasagawa.
Ang pangunahing layunin ng kampanya ay payabungin ang pag-unawa at pagpapahalaga sa kahalagahan ng IKSP o kinaiya sa konserbasyon ng mga ilog at sa huli pagsamahin ang natatanging kaalaman at gawing katuwang ang lokal na komunidad sa pagbuo ng mga lokal na mekanismong adaptive para sa climate change resiliency.
To share her insights on what we've just watched, our next panelist is the Community and Civic Engagement Specialist under MovePH, Rappler's Civic Engagement Arm. Aside from writing stories about movements and civic initiatives, she works with civic and campus journalists across the country. Please welcome Ms. Samantha Bagayas.
Hi everyone. So I actually watched the longer version of the presentation earlier. So I took notes. But first of all, I wanted to congratulate Team Bintuwak for doing such a great job. They actually had a lot of activities. So I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to do so many things throughout this campaign. So there are three things that I especially liked about this campaign. You especially focus on local indigenous community. So that gives us more insights on their practices. So many indigenous communities and their stories are often underreported because these communities are often hard to access. They're usually pretty far. So it's hard to get a glimpse or really to understand what their practices are. So this is a really worthwhile effort for us to better understand their different practices and cultures. So it's a good thing that you put in the effort to reach out to Nabaoinons. So I also noticed that much of the campaign was focused on the celebration of their local culture and practices. So with activities that allowed parang a two-way communication, meaning we are learning from them and they're learning from us. So I think it's very important that when we reach out to communities, we don't go there with our own, like parang with solely to achieve our own personal objectives, but it's also a way for us to understand or hear from these communities and see what we can do together to help address their different challenges and to really get to know their culture. So we really go there to listen. So the campaign was also in the local language, right? I noticed that from the titles, from the names. So I think that also helped with making the advocacy more relatable and easier to absorb, right? Because usually when we talk about advocacies, this is usually in English or maybe in Filipino. So sometimes parang it feels a bit far from us, even though it is something that affects all of us. So I really appreciated the effort to do that since, especially in the local languages of provinces, that's really needed. I'm actually from CDO, so I'm Bisaya. So I think if I was also exposed to advocacies in the Bisaya language, I feel like I would but from much earlier on, I would be more involved in that advocacy, not just now when I'm a journalist. So I also like how this was like a three-pronged campaign. Like there was the academic, like through the journal with the research. There was also the on-ground engagement and community building, like through the organized group of climate advocates, the knowledge sessions and multi-sectoral discussions. What I really appreciated about the on-ground engagement was creating the community, like that group of climate advocates in the community, because that's also important to organize. So it's good that you were able to inspire them and make them more involved in this advocacy, and also the documentation through the documentary and then the coffee book. So I felt like those three efforts at once were actually very helpful. So there were actually so many activities that you mentioned throughout your campaign. So I was really surprised at the diversity in the number of activities. And para tanggal siya dun sa video earlier. But I really like yung quote na sinabi niyo sa longer version where climate change is like the constant flow of the river which can't be stopped, but with proper knowledge and adaptive mechanisms, the vulnerable communities can thrive. So gusto ko talaga siya i-shoutout dito kasi I really like that quote and I like the analogy, especially with the name that you made, yung Daganas, right? So I really appreciate that. And like I mentioned earlier, what I really appreciated the most talaga was the community building aspect of the campaign. Since you mentioned in the video also that your goal was to really involve the community and preserving the environment and upholding these practices. So I actually have a few questions. I know that the presentation, both right now and the longer version, might not encapsulate all your findings, but I did have a few questions while I was watching the presentation. So I'm also curious to know, like, what are the primary objectives of the campaign? Like, what was the thought process behind the planning of the activities? Because I was wondering if your goal is to reach out to the community, or is it to bring out or to make more people know about the practices of this indigenous community so it can also be practiced in other communities? So parang I was also curious about that, because for example the cultural show, that's primarily a showcase of the group's practices and culture, right? So parang if it's just internally lang, like within the community, what we hope to achieve through those things, parang ganun, like what's the aim of some of these activities? And second thing, one thing that really struck me also was how you featured your practices. So most indigenous communities are actually familiar now with how to work with nature to preserve it. Even your study, diba, parang 98% already know about climate change. So parang in a way, many of them are also experts in envi advocacy, diba, and conservation. So there are partners talaga in envi conservation. So right now, I think it's important lang for us to also know, like, what are their needs? So what are their challenges in continuing these practices and their efforts? Like, what help do they need? How can we support them in addressing these challenges in preserving like yung riverine practices nila, especially since that's also your study, right? Because this can also help us in thinking next steps. Like perhaps we can give them like civic engagement trainings, learning sessions on how they can engage with government so they can get the support they need, especially since they already have the community building aspect there. You already have this organized group of advocates who are already interested in pushing for the envi advocacy. And I think paired with the documentaries, maybe you can also do maybe like how to or short explanatory videos on how to do these unique fishing practices. So we can also share the knowledge to people too, na hindi lang sa academic, like with the study, but also through parang mga how-to videos. Kasi sikat yun sa YouTube actually. If you search YouTube, most of the like parang maraming views talaga yung mga how-to videos. So I think this could also be very helpful in, diba, in communities. So this can even be an online campaign also. That can be another effort. So we can also forward the stories of this indigenous community and their experiences, their challenges. So I said a lot of things, but I think the direction and next step of this campaign is really up to you. And I just want to give a few suggestions so you can also help further support the community.